Have you ever just collapsed on the couch at the end of the week, absolutely drained, and thought, why am I so exhausted? I mean, theoretically, we have more freedom and autonomy than any generation before us. We aren't clocking into factories for 16 hours a day under the watchful eye of an overseer. Yet collectively, we are just burnt out. Well, in today's Explainer, we're taking a really deep psychological dive into exactly why that is, exploring Byung-Chul Han's incredibly eye-opening book, The Burnout Society. This isn't your typical time management advice or a lecture on working too many hours. No, this is about the invisible internal violence we are literally committing against our own minds. So let's slow down for a minute and unravel the hidden mechanics of the modern psyche. Okay, let's dive right into this with a question that might hit a little close to home. Is voluntary overtime actually making you feel good? We live in a culture that absolutely glorifies the hustle, right? You know the vibe. Be your own boss, rise and grind, staying up till 2 a.m. to work on your side hustle. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor. But Han asks us a deeply unsettling, almost terrifying question here. What if this endless burning desire to optimize yourself isn't actually freedom at all? What if this whole idea of working for yourself is just the most brilliant, most efficient, and totally invisible form of social control ever invented? To understand this, Han argues we need to realize that we no longer live in the society of the past. We've crossed over into what he calls the achievement society. And in this new world, the very vocabulary of our lives has fundamentally changed. We aren't constantly told you may not or you must do this anymore. The defining, overriding word of our entire era is simply can. Just think about it for a second. Yes, we can is literally the ultimate mantra of our times. The old prohibitions, the strict rules, the rigid laws, they've all been seamlessly replaced by projects, personal initiative, and this endless demand for motivation. You see, the inhabitants of this society are no longer obedient subjects just taking orders from above. Instead, we are all expected to be entrepreneurs of ourselves. Let's just pause and really absorb that shift. The pressure to produce? It doesn't come from the outside anymore. It comes from the limitless, overwhelming horizon of what you could potentially achieve. Now, what's really interesting about this transition is how it looks in practice. The philosopher Michel Foucault famously described the 20th century as a disciplinary society. Picture a world of factories, borders, strict teachers, and bosses barking orders. It was a world functioning under the heavy, oppressive burden of should. But today, those literal and metaphorical walls have been torn down. They've been replaced by sleek, open-plan offices, boutique fitness studios, and this relentless wave of positivity. The old disciplinary society produced criminals and madmen, people who broke the rigid rules. But our achievement society, driven by the relentless, mandatory positivity of can, it produces something entirely different. It produces exhausted, depressive individuals. And there is a deeply ruthless, almost sinister economic logic behind this shift. Why did society move away from should and embrace can? Well, quite simply, because should has a hard limit. When you physically force people to work, eventually they get tired, they unionize, or they just outright resist. But can is absolutely limitless. If you can convince people that endless, grueling labor is actually just self-realization or building their personal brand, they will willingly, enthusiastically work themselves to the bone. The modern achievement subject is infinitely more productive than the obedient factory worker, purely because they believe they're doing it entirely for themselves. It is a brilliant trap. Let's break down how this actually rewires our brains. If you look at the 20th century, psychological control operated through what Freud called the restrictive superego. It was all about prohibition. It repressed you, which often led to neuroses like hysteria because you were constantly at war with external societal rules. But look at the 21st century. Today, the controller isn't society, it's your own ideal self. The mechanism isn't repression anymore, it's seduction. You project this perfect, highly optimized, incredibly successful version of yourself into the future, and you actively seduce yourself into chasing it. And the result? It's not hysteria. It is profound, debilitating exhaustion. Because you're fighting an unwinnable war against an idealized mirage you can literally never catch. So, the crucial point we arrive at here is Han's core, explosive thesis, auto-exploitation. In the past, exploitation was straightforward. You had a bad boss and you, the overworked employee. The lines were clear. Today, however, you are simultaneously the prison guard and the prisoner. You are carrying your own personal labor camp around inside your head. And this is so incredibly lethal precisely because it comes wrapped in this beautiful, deceptive illusion of freedom. You grind yourself down, sacrifice your sleep, and skip meals under the guise of personal growth.
But make no mistake, it is a paradoxical freedom. It's a freedom that ultimately turns into invisible violence against your own mind and body.
And this image of the frayed rope brilliantly illustrates exactly what's happening to us. Notice that the rope isn't snapping because someone is pulling it from the outside. It is snapping from the unbearable compounding tension it holds within itself. Hahn makes a fascinating point here. He says that modern afflictions, things like severe depression, ADHD, and burnout, they aren't infections caused by some foreign virus attacking us from the outside. They are infarctions. It's a neurological block. Your nervous system literally overheats and shuts down from the sheer volume of overachievement, overstimulation, and overcommunication. The rope snaps simply because you tried to say yes to absolutely everything. Hahn writes something here that really stops you in your tracks. He says, the depressive human being is an animal laborans that exploits itself. It is predator and prey at once. Let that sink in for a moment. Predator and prey at the exact same time. It is the ultimate tragic irony of the modern worker. We fought so hard to shed the cruel masters of the past, only to turn around and become our own most ruthless, unforgiving masters. We hunt ourselves. And when we finally hit that inevitable wall, when we realize we physically and mentally can no longer keep up the pace, it leads to this intense, destructive self-reproach. We blame ourselves. We are fighting a relentless, invisible war, and we are the casualties. This brings us to a concept Hahn calls the violence of positivity. Now, I know that sounds like a total oxymoron, right? How can positivity be violent? But consider this little fact. Burnout wasn't even a recognized psychological term until the 1970s. Fast forward to today, and it's a literal global epidemic. Positivity crosses the line into violence when it completely erases our ability to say no. When we feel like we can't say no to taking on more work, or doing more networking, or starting another side hustle, we end up drowning in a suffocating sea of more. This endless internal crusade for self-improvement overloads the ego, and it systematically burns us out from the inside. Okay, let's just take a collective breath here. We've spent some time looking really deeply into the grim diagnosis of this epidemic. We understand the invisible cage of this achievement society, and we see the exhausting daily reality of auto-exploitation. But don't worry, the source material doesn't just leave us stuck in the dark. It actually offers a deeply liberating philosophical antidote to all of this. So the big question is, how do we actually step out of this raging current? How do we escape this invisible violence of excessive positivity? Well, the answer requires us to fundamentally rewire how we interact with time, with our attention, and crucially, with our own impulses. Think about how we treat multitasking today. We put it on our resumes. We treat it as this elite, highly sought-after skill, a sign of constant, rapid-fire productivity. But Hahn argues the exact opposite. He says it's actually a regression. Think about it. In the wild, an animal must constantly scan the horizon for threats, keep an eye on its young, and look for food all at the same time, darting frantically from one stimulus to the next. That scattered, hyperactive attention, that's just sheer basic survival. But what truly built human culture, art, science, and philosophy, it was contemplation, the capacity for deep, unbroken, immersive attention. We are tragically trading our distinctly human capacity for profound wonder just to adopt the frantic, panicked rush of an animal scanning for threats. To reclaim that capacity for deep attention, we have to do something radical. We have to reclaim something we've been heavily conditioned to fear. This beautiful quote from Walter Benjamin really points the way. He wrote that deep boredom is a dream bird that hatches the egg of experience. Today, if we have even 3 seconds of downtime, we pull out our smartphones, right? We view boredom as a failure, a weakness, this terrifying void that must be instantly filled with a screen or a new task. But Hahn reminds us that profound boredom is actually the peak of mental relaxation. If sleep is what relaxes the physical body, deep boredom is what relaxes the mind. Without it, a purely hectic, nonstop rush doesn't produce anything actually new. It just mechanically accelerates the same old things. We desperately need the stillness of this dream bird to hatch genuine creativity and new ideas. Let's move to how this builds into Hahn's ultimate solution, which he calls the vita contemplativa, the contemplative life. Now, don't mistake this for passive weakness or laziness. It is actually a fiercely powerful state of being that actively resists the endless flood of rushing stimuli. It is the profound, sovereign power of not doing. We usually think of power purely as the ability to do something, right? To act. But think about it. If you lack the power not to do, if you have to respond to every single ping, every email, every trend, you aren't powerful. You are just a hyperactive machine at the total mercy of your environment. True sovereignty, true control, requires the power to pause. So how do we actually walk away from this invisible control? First, we have to start embracing that profound boredom without a shred of guilt. Let yourself just sit there. Second, we need to practice what's called the pedagogy of seeing. This means literally training your eyes and your mind to be patient, allowing things to come to you without instantly reflexively reacting. Third, try to swap out your isolated competitive exhaustion, what Han calls I tiredness, for we tiredness. That's a peaceful, shared calm you experience with friends or family that has absolutely nothing to do with networking or achieving. And finally, and most importantly, exercise your distinctly human power to set a hard boundary. Relearn how to simply say no. In a world that invisibly demands our endless self-optimization, a world where literally every waking moment is commodified into a project or a hustle, simply stepping off that treadmill is a profound, radical act of defiance. The ultimate rebellion in our achievement society isn't grinding harder, waking up earlier, or achieving more than the next person. It is cultivating the sovereign quiet power not to do. It is finding the immense courage to be still, to experience profound wonder, and to finally allow your exhausted nervous system to heal. So as you look at your own life after this explainer, I want to leave you with this. Are you ready to stop being your own most ruthless taskmaster? Because true freedom isn't the relentless compulsion to always do more. It's having the deep internal peace to finally say enough.